Hey everybody, it's Gordon Majak here, back from the depths of the Rona. My goodness, I made it through the storm. So just as a real quick update here before we get to our brand new and much anticipated and much awaited on my part especially, new episode here. Before we get to that, let me just give you a quick little thumbnail of what's been going on here because as you can see, I have not been very active lately. So if you go back to the previous two videos I posted there, the Danny O'Keefe, Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, and then the Albert Hammond, It Never Rains in Southern California. That's when I got COVID. And I didn't know it at the time, but looking back on it now, that's the day on the calendar that it all makes sense. I felt great when I was recording those songs and recording those videos. That was by far the highlight of my day that day, 12 days ago there. But certainly outside of that time spent recording those two music videos, the rest of the time, boy, if I was honest with myself, I was really starting to feel it. And sure enough, I finished those two videos, thought everything was fine, thought I was just going to carry on and do more videos the very next day. I was all hyped up and ready to go with this video 10, 12 days ago. But and then that next day is when I tested positive, and then sort of the stuff hit the fan there a little bit. And I would kind of liken it to a sort of a mild to medium flu. But the biggest thing is just that I haven't had much appetite, have not been eating, and nothing sounds good and nothing tastes good until now. So as of yesterday, we're testing negative and in the clear and starting to slowly get back to normal. But boy, 10 days, 12 days without videos. Hello, I had so much stuff that I was really wanting to get to there, just bam, bam, right after the Danny O'Keefe and the Albert Hammond. But life being what it is, everything sort of got put on hold there for a while. So that's where I have been. I've been thinking about these videos. I've just been so out of it. I just have not really felt like I could sit down and turn on this dang camera until today. So let's jump into this one. We've been cruising through the 70s there, as you remember from those two previous videos, Danny O'Keefe and Albert Hammond. And we're still going to stay in the 70s. And you may remember that I teased in that last video, Albert Hammond, I teased that I was going to be sharing with you guys a song from my favorite band in the next video. Remember that way back there? I said that. Yeah. So here's the album. And I'll explain the whole situation here because there's quite a backstory between me and this artist. Here is the album. There it is in all its glory from 1973. That is, of course, Chicago. The album is Chicago 6. And there's the gents up there for the first time appearing on their own album cover. Here's a slightly better shot there, left to right. We have, of course, the great Peter Cetera on bass and vocals. Next to Peter, we have the great Danny Seraphine on drums. Holding it down next to Danny there looks like the great Robert Lamm, composer, keyboardist, lead vocalist. Next to Robert, we have Lee Loughnane on trumpets. Next to Lee, of course, the one and only, the great Terry Kath on guitar and lead vocals. Next to Terry, Walter Parazaider on the saxophone and the flutes, the woodwinds, etc. And finally, there at the end, we have the great James Pankow on trombone, percussion, background vocals, brass arrangements, etc., etc. Classic composer of many hit songs, etc. That James Pankow. So there's the boys, Chicago. Now, I generally put it this way. I say this period of Chicago, the original classic period of Chicago, which began with their first album there in 1969, Chicago Transit Authority, up to the end of the Terry Kath era, when Terry Kath so tragically passed there in 1978, early 1978. So let's say those first 11 albums that comprise the Terry Kath era of Chicago. I always say that is my all-time favorite band. Now, I don't engage in any arguments of who's better or who's this or who's that. Look, the simple reality, and again, I say this all the time, the Beatles are on the top of the mountain by themselves. Any way you slice it, dice it, cut it, analyze it, in terms of the pop rock music realm, the Beatles are the top of the mountain, and that's as good as it gets. They're the best, they're the greatest. It's not even worth debating or arguing about. So I tip my hat to the Beatles as being the greatest of the great. But when it comes to my favorite artists, and again, I love the Beatles to death, but when it comes to my favorite artists, as I said, this classic era of Chicago there from 1969 through 1977, that is it for me. Man, that catalog in some ways was my Beatles growing up, because I was, a little bit behind the curve age-wise on the Beatles, being so young when they came out. Eventually caught up to them and loved all the Beatles stuff. But Chicago sort of hit me right there in my wheelhouse of I discovered Chicago, obviously, when they came out in 1969 there. I was 11, and I distinctly remember seeing that Chicago Transit Authority album there in the spring and summer of 1969 and hearing some of those songs like Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is, etc. And then all the way through, the next album. The first album is a double album. The second album, Chicago 2, is a double album. That's the album with 25 or 6 to 4 and Make Me Smile, and the whole suite with Make Me Smile and Color My World that James Pankow so geniusly put together. Then the third album, another double album in 1971. That's the Chicago 3 album. And it was really when I was 13 in 1971, my best friend's older brother got that Chicago at Carnegie Hall album. And even though I had heard the previous 3 Chicago albums in 69, 70, and 71, I wouldn't say I was really connected to that music at that point. I mean, I certainly knew it and I liked it, but there wasn't a personal thing to it yet. But then in 1971 there, when I was 13, and my friend's older brother got that Carnegie Hall album, and they were just playing that album constantly. And that album went so deep into the album cuts, the Carnegie Hall stuff, playing a lot of the deeper album things that I would not have heard on the radio there in 69, 70, or 71. So that's when I really got exposed in 1971 to sort of the longer form, what I would call the longer form of Chicago, the depth of their catalog of Chicago. And that's when my love affair with the band really grew in interest, in earnest, was right then in 1971. Now, they followed that up the next year in 1972 with Chicago 5, and that was really their monster breakthrough album there in the summer of 1972. That's the album with Saturday in the Park and Dialogue. And Chicago 5 became Chicago's first #1 album there in 1972. #1 for 9 weeks in a row. Not a bad run there, so to speak, in 1972 for Chicago. Now, some things changed, however, along the way there. So we're 5 Chicago albums into their career, starting from 1969 in the Transit Authority album, then Chicago 2, then Chicago 3, then Carnegie Hall in 71, the live album, Chicago 5 in 72, as I said, their first #1 album. And now we're up to 1973. But Chicago's career is changing it so quickly and in so many ways that it's really just kind of staggering at this point. They're coming off their first #1 album. They're international superstars. They've been around the world a couple times touring. They're a huge success everywhere in the world at this point, and they've got that #1 record, and they've got a huge hit song on the charts in Saturday in the Park. Well, behind the scenes, their legendary producer and manager, James William Guercio, has been looking around the United States for a piece of property that he could develop into a state-of-the-art sort of retreat / recording studio / dude ranch / I don't know, whatever else you want to call it, sort of a destination studio. He has ambitions of building his own state-of-the-art, world-class destination studio. Jim Guercio does. And he's been looking around, and he finds a piece of property in Colorado, up in the mountains out of Denver and out of Boulder. Up in Nederland, Colorado, he finds a place called the Caribou Ranch. And he starts on his quest of turning that into a world-class recording facility. And specifically, he wants to use this for Chicago, his band, since he's not only the producer of all of the Chicago albums there in the early days, but he's also their manager. So he's got his hands in everything Chicago's doing. And a great deal of the motivation for Jim Guercio to get this remote studio up and running is because he's tired of dealing with the unions in the recording studio situation in New York City, where he had done the previous 5 Chicago albums. So by this time, when they get to this album, he's just about done with the whole thing, and he's getting his thing going out there in Colorado at the famous Caribou Ranch. Now, this... Yeah, so there they are. They're at Caribou Ranch. They're in that picture, right? This was always a great one. A great ad here from that time. America's premier rock and roll band. They could have just left out the words rock and roll and just said America's premier band, right? Chicago was the best thing going in 1973. So they come into this album at Caribou Ranch, and the whole situation is different. Chicago is, as I said, international superstars. The money is rolling in. The albums are selling. The singles are selling. They're a huge concert attraction everywhere they go. And the whole game is just about to shift and change in some pretty cool ways. And one of those ways is musically. Now, up to this point, Chicago, for all their great success, as I said, the previous album's the number 1 album. They're working on Chicago 6. For all their great success, they had really been, for the most part, carried by the songwriting and the creativity of Robert Lamm. Now, it's an all-star band, of course, in their own rights. We already know it. When you have a rhythm section with Terry Kath and Peter Cetera and Danny Seraphine, and Robert Lamm on keyboards writing all those great songs, and James Pankow writing those great horn arrangements, they had a lot to work with there. But the truth of the matter is, from the very first album, the majority of the songs were written by Robert Lamm. The majority of the second album was written by Robert Lamm. The majority of the third album, he had, I think, 8 of the 9 songs on Chicago 5, that number 1 record. So Robert came into the group situation when the group first started with a notebook full of songs, and they were just systematically working through his catalog of songs. And of course, he was also constantly writing new stuff. Now, for this album, so this is the album, remember, we're talking about Chicago 6 here. Couple big hits, couple big Chicago classics on this album. Feeling Stronger Every Day, you may remember that one from the summer of 1973. That was a collaboration between James Pankow, the trombonist, and Peter Cetera, who of course ended up co-writing it and singing it. And then you may remember the follow-up hit to that was another James Pankow song, and that was called Just You and Me, again sung by Peter Cetera, again another Chicago classic. Now, what is not as well known is, unless you are a really hardcore Chicago fan, like I am, self-proclaimed Chicago expert, I am this close to starting a dedicated Chicago channel so I can really get my Chicago Jones on. I'm this close to doing it. I've really been thinking about it during this downtime when I was sick. So that, keep your eyes out for that. I'm still thinking about it. I'm not totally sure yet, but I'm thinking hard on it. But during this time for Chicago, if you were a really hardcore fan, you'd say, well, what else were they doing on these albums in addition to these 2 big Chicago classic hits, Feeling Stronger Every Day and Just You and Me? And here's what you would find out. The song I'm going to play for you today is a song called Rediscovery, written and sung by the great Robert Lamm. I would estimate that this song is maybe the sixth best song on the album. Okay? By my estimation. The sixth best song out of 10. Okay? Let's say you've got Feeling Stronger Every Day and Just You and Me. Okay? There's the top two right there. This is the album with the classic What's This World Comin' To? Just an absolute barn burner. That's a Chicago classic. There's our third greatest song on the album, let's say. Let's next take the little medley there that Robert Lamm put together for the first two songs on side 2 of this album, which is songs called Something in This City Changes People, which segues into Hollywood. There's a pretty damn good song right there, a piece of music, two pieces there melded together. So we get to Rediscovery, the song that I'm going to play for you, and this is, by my own estimation, the sixth best song on the album. But what I want you to think about as we're hearing this is ask yourself, how unbelievably deep was this band? How unbelievably deep was Robert Lamb's songbook of songs that he either already had developed and was working on or was writing along the way. How just, if this is the sixth best song, and wait till you hear it, it's ridiculously good. Okay. Not a song you probably heard anywhere else, Rediscovery. But it features an incredible Terry Kath guitar solo on the wah-wah pedal, as you'll see when we get to it here in a second. And you know, Terry Kath is notorious for his 190-mile-an-hour speed runs on some of his solos, some of which I'm sure you've seen on YouTube. They're everywhere there, reacting to them. But what you don't maybe know about Terry Kath is the guy was an absolute master of so many different vibes and so many different styles and so many different influences. And he's the master not only of the 190-mile-an-hour tornado, he's also just a straight-up funk master, as you will hear when we get to this. You've got Peter Cetera holding down the bass, the great Danny Seraphine on drums, written by Robert Lamm, sung by Robert Lamm. Rediscovery, lyrically, if you listen to these lyrics, Robert Lamm lays it all out for you. He tells you his whole story of where he is in his life at the moment, where the band is, in a manner of speaking. He gives you the full picture. And this is a sound from Chicago in 1973 that I will just say none of us had ever heard before. This was a brand new sound coming out of Chicago and coming out of Caribou Ranch and coming out of 1973. It's almost like, the way I've always thought of it is that they had that first 5-year run of their career there, those first 5 albums, culminating in the number 1 album, Chicago 5, which was their first number 1. And then, of course, this album went number 1, and the next 3 albums went to number 1. But it started there with Chicago 5 and Chicago 6. This album just kept it going, kept the string going. But this was a sound that we had not heard from Chicago. A totally different sound right out of 1973. And if you think of some of the different influences in terms of jazz and popular jazz and contemporary jazz and soul music and just some of the different musical vibes that would have been present for young Robert Lamm and his mates in Chicago. The way they pulled it off with this song, just a one-of-a-kind performance from Chicago, and something that sure caught my ear back there in 1973. Everybody knew Feeling Stronger Every Day and Just You and Me, and eventually everybody got around to, if you were a real Chicago fan, you got around to figuring out that What's This World Coming To is a pretty special Chicago song as well. And I already mentioned Something in This City in Hollywood. But this was a song that, wait a second, what? What was that? That was the reaction I had and hopefully that you will have. From 1973 and the Chicago 6 album, a Robert Lamm composition, and check out Terry, Kath, Peter Cetera, and Danny Seraphine. This rhythm section is holding it down. A song called Rediscovery. Now, come on. You never heard them sound that funky. So funky. And this is one of those songs that from the very first time I heard this on that Chicago 6 album, it was really easy to visualize them in the studio at night with the lights down really low in the studio, maybe just some candles going or something, and just stretching out on this song. And I thank God that they felt, that Robert Lamm felt the freedom to just do what he wanted to do and write what he wanted to write and not have to, confine himself to whatever all the bullshit record company popular, demands were, that they had to sound a certain way. Because just hearing them stretch out on this one, and you'll hear how much fun they're having here, it's just so worth it. Are you kidding me? I'm serious. The 6th best song on the album, arguably. That's how deep Chicago was rolling in their 70s heyday. Robert Lamm just throwing down that beautiful electric piano, that beautiful Rhodes piano, so funky. And Terry Kath just killing that wah-wah pedal. Again, just funk and soul just dripping off of that thing. And then you got Danny Seraphine and Peter Cetera back there on the drums and the bass, just sitting back in the pocket, just letting Robert Lamm and Terry Kath just take this thing. What an absolute ride. This mountain majesty is rediscovery. That's what Robert Lamm had to say back then in 1973. And I agree with him. I think this particular stretch here, my favorite, as I said, that Terry Kath era Chicago is my favorite all-time artist, my favorite all-time band, that 10-year stretch there from 69 to 77. But within that portion of their career, within the Terry Kath era, this particular part right here, when they're transitioning from the New York recording scene and that first huge phase of their success there, that 5th album into this album, Chicago 6, into the next album, Chicago 7, that span of those 3 records from 72, 73, and 74, that to me is my absolute personal, I don't even know what to say. That to me is just my favorite. Not only my favorite Chicago, but my favorite just about anything from that time. Just absolute magic, that lineup. And to think that they could go, like I said, so deep into these albums that they're putting out stuff like this without even thinking about it. And it's just so funky and so nasty. And I really debated. I really originally was going to use the other song. I was going to play that medley of Something in This City Changes People into Hollywood, because I thought that was such an important shifting of the sound, looking back on it, for Chicago back there in 1973. But I decided to go with this one because it was even more obscure. How ridiculous is that? Even more obscure. And as you can hear, they just had so much going on back then. The great Robert Lamm killing it with Chicago on Rediscovery. We are back. Finally, I may have to redo this. I don't know yet. I'll rewatch the video. This is my first run through. I didn't do a rehearsal or a practice or anything. I'm just kind of jumping back in after a couple weeks out. And so I'll have to look and see if I'm going to use this video, if I'm going to reshoot it. Do I look like a corpse? Do I look like I can actually get through this stuff and talk about Chicago and tell you guys how much I love that early Chicago? We will see. Let me go scope out the video and we'll see if we have to come back and redo it, if we're going to let it fly. Thank you guys for hanging in there. I saw so many cool comments while I was down with the Rona there for a week and a half. I saw so many great comments from so many of you. Really appreciate that. Picked up some new subscribers along the way. Terribly disappointed in myself that I just could not get myself up to do any videos there for a while. I just did not have any sort of energy or mojo or musical mojo or much of anything there for a while. So feel bad about that, because I really wanted to get some momentum going there and crank out some videos and just turn you guys on to all this great new stuff that I've been wanting to share with you. But life is what it is, and so we had to do what we had to do. But we are back now. And what do you think of my idea about the Chicago thing? You know, I mean, I could just go, like I said, I could really do a channel that's just nothing but that Terry Kath era Chicago. And man, what a blast we would have. I got so many stories to talk about in my Chicago history. So I guess we'll figure that out along the way. Thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. We will be back with another great video. You're going to love the next one. We're going to do a similar thing. I'm going to give you one of my great favorite bands all time, especially from the 70s there, and a song from their catalog that is so far deep into one of their albums, you won't even believe what an incredible song is just buried on this artist's album. It's a damn crime. We're coming back with that one. See you soon. Thanks, guys. And